Many new managers believe authority is the golden ticket to getting things done. But here's the truth. In today's interconnected, cross-functional workplace, you can have a title and still get nowhere without influence. It's frustrating. You're responsible for results, but the people you rely on don't even report to you. The good news, there's a better way. So in this video, we'll explore how to rally support, foster collaboration, and align goals without leaning on formal power. And you'll walk away knowing exactly how to lead when the organizational chart isn't on your side. Let's take a look. Okay, let's talk about managing without authority. So let's clarify a little bit what tools we have at our disposal and how authority and power works. So let's look at the triad of leadership power. So when we look at leadership power, one of the powers you have currently or are going to get is positional power, right? And that is the name tag that you have with manager or team lead or whatever the name of the job is going to be. And that means that in the company you are announced now as a manager, and that means now you have certain rights that before you didn't have. Now you're suddenly allowed, for example, to hire people, to fire people, to have discretion over salaries of people, all these kind of things. That is positional power, and that's an important power. It's like Theodore Roosevelt said, speak with a soft voice but carry a big stick. So if you have a lot of positional power, that will help you to get things done. But for this lecture, we assume now that we're not going to use that, right? We're going to maximize the two other areas that you don't see yet. And that is, the following is expert power. So expert power is the power that you have because you are an expert in your field. And it can be a technical field, but it can also be in other fields, like it's any kind of knowledge area. So it can be in marketing, in finance, in all kinds of things. And then we have the third field, and that is your relational power. And that is also called influence. So we're going to look specifically at expert power and at relationship power and how to maximize those so you don't have to use positional power or you don't have positional power. So what is expert power? Because the good thing is all of you have still some expert form of power. And I would say if you maximize that expert power, you can maximize your influence already. So what is expert power? Expert power is authority through competence. And competence is knowledge in action, right? So only knowledge is not enough. It's knowledge in action that is competence. So people follow you because you understand the subject. Your judgment is trusted and your advice adds value. So expert power is earned, right? It's not assigned. If people call you an expert in an area you never done anything in and you haven't shown that you're an expert in that area through competence, then expert power doesn't mean anything. So expert power is really like, let's say, an honest power because people can literally see if you have it or don't have it. And in technical and other specific knowledge environments, right, expertise often outweighs hierarchy. So in technical companies, even if you're on the bottom of the hierarchy, if you have a very good technical proposal that will help your end user and for example, your app or your software or whatever, you will probably be able to convince your CEO that that's important to do and they probably will go along with it, right? So expert power is very powerful. And if we talked about competence, so competence earns respect faster than titles. Depends a little bit on the culture also, right? For example, in the Dutch culture where I am from, people, they don't really respect the title. Maybe they respect it, but they always think like, I first want to see it before I believe it, right? So a title doesn't mean so much as, for example, I've also done a lot of workshops in China. In China, when you get a title, you immediately gain a lot of respect and credibility with that. So in different cultures, people look different at job titles, right? And then decisions are driven by knowledge and trade-offs. So in the tech sector, but also in many knowledge sectors nowadays, decisions are made based on knowledge and trade-offs. So if you are an expert, you have knowledge and you can help with the trade-offs, you can help drive better decisions. So you will be seen as an expert and be brought in as an expert to help with better decision making. So if people trust your expertise, they give your ideas more weight. So if you come in with an idea and people trust you because of your expertise, that idea will probably be quite easy to follow through upon. So if you have an idea but you don't have any expertise, people won't really trust you. So your idea is a little bit difficult to follow through on, right? Because you haven't have the credentials yet in your expert power. So you might ask, okay, but what can I do about that? I got you covered. So how to increase your expert power? So you don't need to be the top technical specialist, right? But you must stay credible. So what can you do? You have to make sure that you stay technically relevant. Not only because of you want to have expert power, because also in your management job that you have in a tech company, it is always important to stay technically relevant. You need to understand the tools, the system, and the trade-offs your teams work with, right? If you understand that, you can make better decisions. Also important to build domain knowledge, right? So know how your product creates value and where the risks are. If you understand why end user consumers like your product and you can create value with that, that is very valuable for the companies, and also where risks are, right? And you also want to contribute insightfully. Every time when you are in meetings and all these kind of things, ask strong questions and make sure that you support decisions with data. Data-driven decisions are important. And also add clarification in discussions. So you see, if you do these things, you don't have to position yourself, look at me, I am an expert. No, automatically with these adding of clarity in the decision, with asking strong questions, people will realize, oh, that is good, that was a good question, that was a good insight. He or she is really an expert in the field. Also, and that's of course, that always is important, keep learning. So invest in continuous development. You can do example courses, certification, industry updates, all these kind of things. So expert power grows when your competence is visible and consistent. So you can be, of course, a very good expert who sits behind the computer and you're very good at everything. But when your competence and your expertise is in action and other people can see them, then it starts to weigh, right? Because if you are an expert in a certain field, but you can't communicate it well, and other people are not even aware that you are an expert, then that doesn't really help you to use your expert power, right? Okay? So that is expert power. That is a very important one for all of you. For me too, right? Then we go to the third one. That is relationship power, and we also call that influence. So let's take a deeper look at that. So influence, in other words, we can also say is your long-term leadership capital. And it's not only leadership, but in this case it's management course, right? So it is your capital. Is capital something that you gain quickly? Often not. You often get it through compounding interest, right? Or compounding elements. And it says also long-term, so it takes a time to establish influence, right? You don't have relationship influence immediately. Expert influence you have immediately, but this is influence that you have through long-term leadership capital. So let's clarify that a little bit more. There are 3 pillars of influence. So here you have to imagine that we just don't want to talk too much about the expert power, but just about relational influence. So what influence do you have? You have credibility, you have relationships, and you have reciprocity. So in short, I will later explain them a little more, but credibility is basically you know your stuff. And you know your stuff is not only on the area of expertise that we just mentioned, but it is you know your stuff also as a manager. You know how to make decisions, you know how to lead meetings, you know how to give feedback, you know how to stand your ground, you know how to make good proposals, you give good presentations, or you're always prepared in meetings, all these kinds of things. Then also relationships. People trust you. You work with people and people have learned to trust you because they have seen if you say you're going to do something that you also do that. And then the last one there is the reciprocity, right? You create mutual value. So you create value. So if you help someone, someone other helps you too. So let's look in each of these pillars a little in more detail. So, first of all, credibility. What does that mean? People believe you because you are competent and consistent. So you see, that's why I was also talking about long term, because you can only show competence and consistency over a longer period of time. And I don't mean years, right? I just mean months. So what they unconsciously ask in their mind is, do you deliver? Do you know your field? Are you consistent? That is what other people, they're not literally asking their questions, but they know that in their mind, right? If you deliver, are consistent and know your field. So if you do that consistently and with competence, your credibility will increase, right? So let's go to relationships. People listen to you because they trust and respect you. So do people trust your intentions? They trust your intentions because if you had intentions before and you follow through on that and you know that they are the right intentions and you do something with it, then they know they can trust you, right? Do they feel respected? Have you invested in the relationships? So the relationships with your team members and with your peers and with your managers and CEOs, they are based on, of course, work, but they are also based on having a relationship with each other that goes a little further than that, right? So that is the relationship pillar. And then we go to reciprocity. So reciprocity means people support you because you've supported them. So if you are a new manager, what you want to make sure, if you're with a new leadership team or new CEO, you want to show them that you want to add value in that relationship, right? And often if you provide value in a relationship, you will see that the other person comes back also giving you value. So do you create value for others? Do you help before you ask? If somebody only comes to you ask, and never adds any value to you, then what will happen, and you maybe notice that in your own life, you already start to think, oh, there's the person again. What does he or she want from me? Okay. So you see, when you are a new manager, you probably have already expert power. So if you want to manage without using your authority, what you want to do is you want to crank up your expert power. You cannot do that à la minute, right? Because it takes a while to build up that expert power. So what you want to do is keep building on the knowledge field that you're good at and responsible for. And you also want to work on your relationship power. You will want to establish good relationships within the company with the people that are dependent on each other. And that's how you can already increase your authority without using position. There's also the step of persuasion, right? So what is the relationship between influence and persuasion? So how persuasion and influence work together. They work together. They are part of something similar, right? But let's explain persuasion first because we talked about influence already. So persuasion is a tool to exert influence. And later I clarified a little bit more. And influence enhances persuasion. When you have a lot of influence from the relation or from the expertise side, it's easier for you to persuade others, right? Because you have a lot of trust and credibility already. And to be able to persuade people, it's good to have a lot of influence already. So influence serves as the foundation for effective persuasion. So if you have positional power, if you have expert power, and you have relational influence, then your persuasion, and persuasion often you will use in a case where you will, for example, want to convince people for a proposal or something, will become easier. So let's take a look at that. Managerial persuasion. So just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, persuasion is the ability to influence someone's thinking or behavior through reasoning, clarity, and connection without relying on authority, right? So that's why we talk about persuasion, because persuasion has also to do with managing without authority, right? If you don't have authority, you want to and you have to persuade other people to follow you. So, what is then persuasion? So, there are 4 steps in persuasion. So, the foundations of persuasion are the following. That's trust. You need to have trust. If people don't trust you, it's very difficult to persuade. And the trust comes also, you saw that already back in influence, right? Credibility, influence, trust, they all have to do with each other. An example of that I always give is, I don't know if that happens in your country, but in the Netherlands, they knock at your door to try to sell you something. You don't know who these people are. If you don't know who that is and they're not from a famous brand, then where does the trust come from? You're very critical to those kind of things. Automatically, something in your mind goes off, be careful, scam, and these kind of things. That's inherently part of us, right? That we're very cautious. So we're going to talk about it in a second. Perspective is important. So do you understand the perspective of the other people that you're trying to persuade? Because if they don't feel that you understand the world that they're living in, they feel that the case probably doesn't make sense. Then we talk about the case has to be strong, right? So when you come with a proposal, it has to be a good proposal that ticks off all the boxes, right? And then when you communicate about that proposal, it has to be clear, confident communication, right? And I say proposal, but it can be in a meeting, it can be something, a point you want to make, it can be a proposal, it can be a presentation, it can be a feature, it can be a restructuring, it can be hiring, firing, it can be anything, right? Persuasion is always at play. So let's look at that trust, because maybe you think, okay, how do I do that? Or what do you mean with that? So people ask themselves, do I trust this person? And trust creates openness. And without it, resistance automatically begins. So that's why it's important you have trust. So build that through consistency, reliability, integrity, and competence, right? So you see those terminology we already talked about before. So you need to be consistent about delivering your deadline, showing up on time, speaking up in meetings, all these kind of things. You are reliable. Your integrity, you don't gossip about other people. You show that you always have the company's goals first, and that if you promise something to people, that you also do that. And that you have competence in what you're doing. But of course, your competence is growing, right? So if there's no trust, it's very difficult to persuade people. But luckily, if it's a technical area where your expertise comes in, then many times that expertise power will lead to trust, and then you have a good basis also for persuasion again. Then, let's go to perspective. Understand before you convince. You have to show other people that you understand where they are before you can convince them. So before presenting, and it doesn't have to be a presentation, right? But ask yourself, what matters to them? What pressures are they under? What risks do they see probably? And what do they gain or lose? Because many times people, if you want to change something, some people win something or gain something and other people will lose something. You need to be able to understand it, because then you understand where resistance is going to come from. So if you don't understand their world, your argument won't land. So having that perspective shapes the message that you have to deliver. So perspective is something you do and you think about before you're going to deliver it, right? So now you have to have a strong case, and that is the logical backbone of your proposal, for example, right? So a strong case always answers why a change or why this proposal, because a proposal often changes something, right? Why now? Why not next week or last year or in a year? And why is this a solution? And what are the risks of that solution? Because there's always risk involved, so you need to think about these risks and be ready to answer how we can deal with that. What happens if we don't act, right? Because these questions will always show up. And you want to support that strong case with data again, right? If you show real data, that makes it always clear. And what I mentioned, clear reasoning. If people can follow your reasoning, how you go from A to your advice, Z for example, it will become easier to go along on your journey that you want them to go on with you, agreeing to your idea. And then of course, anticipated objections. I've seen a lot of proposals of people and presentations that went wrong in the objections phase. And why did it go wrong there? Because they didn't know the perspective. So the questions that came, they felt for the presenter they were coming from an unexpected corner and they weren't ready for that. So you need to anticipate objections. So how do you do that? Prepare for that and do that, for example, with other people in the company and say, okay, if you look this proposal, shoot at it, and what do you think are the critical flaws in this? So if you have a sound logic, then that reduces resistance too, right? So now you already are strongly on the way because you are already trusted, you have a good perspective, you have a strong case, and now when you deliver that case, you want to do that in clear and confident communication, right? So the delivery also creates an impact, right? If I talk in this workshop like this and I deliver it without any emotion and impact and emotional conviction, you will think that I'm not really standing behind the information and the lessons that I have, right? So even great ideas fail with weak delivery. Although, of course, if you have a lot of expert power and a lot of authority and a lot of relationship power, then the delivery doesn't matter so much. So you see, it's all of an equation, right? But we assume now that everything is relatively a little bit weaker, so you need to crank up all these things to have the best results, right? So communicate clearly, communicate concisely. People don't want to sit 1.5 hours to listen to a proposal, and communicate with conviction. You know what you are talking about, and you know what you're talking about because you're confident in what you're talking about, right? So avoid vague language, avoid an apologetic tone, and avoid over-explaining. Keep the details until the end of the presentation. So if we talk a little bit about the language, instead of saying, I think this might help, you have to have stronger language, right? You need to look at it and say, okay, this will improve delivery speed by 15%. And of course, that 15% has to be true, right? It's not something you're making up because I tell you to be confident. It has to be based on real numbers. So confidence signals competence. There we have the word competence again. And competence is expert power in action. And a part of that is too also the influence. You should see all these things are related to each other. So let's look at an overview of all these elements. All right, so now we can see how everything comes together. So how do you influence and manage without authority? Let's assume you don't have a lot of positional power. So you need your expert power. You try to work on maximizing that. You work on that, becoming better in the field of that you're responsible for. On the other side, you also work on your relationship power, your influence. So you work on your credibility. You work on your relationships. You have good relationships with your team members, with your peers, with your managers and CEOs. You work on basis of reciprocity. So now you have increased your influence. You have increased your expert power. And now maybe there's a situation that you have an idea, a proposal, a presentation, a change or whatever. And now you need to persuade other people of that they go along with that idea of you. And then hopefully because of that, you have built already some trust. If they trust you, you make sure that you understand their perspective, what their world looks like. You make sure that you have a strong case, that it's logic and sound. And then when you prepare it, you want to do it in a clear, confident, communicative way. And that is how you can manage without authority and increase your influence without using positional power. Thanks for watching. You are taking real steps towards becoming a stronger, more effective leader. So, what did you find most helpful today? Drop it in the comments if you'd like to share. And want to go further? Check out my full courses for step-by-step lessons on becoming a better manager. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new video. See you in the next one.